We are back. We're back on Equal Time Soccer here with the lunchtime edition. I'm Mark Pavratsky here with Matt Pavratsky. We have Christie Kopietz, our NSIC insider. She's got all the inside now, the scoops. She, of course, was the MSU Moorhead Dragons coach for the last few years. This is her first year off in a while, adjusting to life as a civilian. And also, of course, as we've said in prior shows, a U of M Crookston Hall of Famer, the all-time leader in goals scored. Welcome, Christie, on your lunch break. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
We always appreciate your insight, and it does maybe help that you don't have to think about balancing the program thoughts with just talking about what's going on in soccer. But how did you, so we talked to a lot of coaches. We know how demanding the schedule is. So I used to have a real big kid job trying to work in Congress and things. And guess what? It was a little too much, and I found a balance here doing something different. So I can relate in a way, but how did you come to the decision to step away from coaching for the time being, right? You have time. But.
Yeah. So I think ultimately the biggest factor was having children. It really grinds my gears to have to say that, because I did thesis research in women in coaching, and so many women get out when they become mothers. And I really did not want to be that person. I wanted to be the warrior who was going to do all of it. But, as my kids got a little bit older, I just felt like I couldn't be the coach that I wanted to be, that I was before I was a mom. And I could not also be the mom that I wanted to be to my kids. Yeah. And so then I always felt like I was doing a disservice to both areas. And I just got to the point where I just felt like it wasn't fair to anyone, myself as well. I do still do education for U.S. Soccer. So I'm still a U.S. Soccer educator. And I did coach my son's U5 rec team.
Okay.
So I'm still kicking the ball around a little bit.
I kind of assumed, I said this to Matt. So Otto, that's Otto, right? So
yes. Good memory.
But I assumed you must have maybe started to get dragged into that. Cause all the parents are looking around. I have a lot of little kid, soccer fan parents, and it's like, they'll show up and guess what? Now you're the new coach. But how is your balance of life different? Obviously getting to coach, your son, but what are you doing now for work, and how has that affected your balance? Because it is, like you said, mainly it was a balance of life thing of wanting to have a better balance for yourself.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it was awesome coaching my son, because it's just about having fun with the game. I think it was more of some parents had a little bit too high expectations of
they're
U5.
Five, right? They're five.
Yeah.
I one summer I coached a U10 team, and there were 8-year-olds on my team. And Mark and I don't have younger siblings. I've probably said this on the show before. I could not believe how young 8 was. I had this idea of what the soccer would be, and I was like, nope. It's just be fun, just be engaged. All it is nope, find ways to be fun. 5 is half that age.
Yes. Yeah. It's, I think it's just reframing your language. So I would say okay, spread out. And they would look at me like I was speaking another language. Yeah. But if I said put your arms out and don't touch someone, they can do that. So it just was thinking about how I could change language from coaching, college players to my little guy. So
that's great.
But the balance, I think, I'm currently work at North Hennepin Community College as a diversity and equity specialist, and I'm also teaching at Hennepin Tech, a sociology course. So I think, it's nice having every single weekend off, and having set hours, I think, is the biggest piece that's hard as a coach, because the type of coach that I want to be, when a player reaches out to me, whether it's 10 p.m. or 6 a.m., I want to respond, whether I should or not. And I just can't turn that off, because I want to be a support system for them. And so, when I get done with my job here, I'm done for the day. I don't think about it. I'm I'm a regular human. This is weird.
I cannot imagine. Yeah, the weekends for so long would be dominated, because both by scouting too, if you didn't have games, right? The season's only so long. You don't want to scout. So yeah, that would be totally flip-flop. Yeah, probably tough to adjust to, even if it's nice, because your rhythms are different. But yeah, but the hours are probably better, so that's nice, Christie. We hope the hours are better for you. Although I'm sure you're staying really busy. Do you, now that the season has started, college season has started, I should say, where your rhythm would have been, in full swing, how do you engage with the game differently? Like, are you able to, do you watch more non D2 college soccer because you're not trying to scout, so you can actually just watch it casually? Do you still tune into NSIC games? How are you engaging with soccer now?
Well, my wife's a big soccer fan, so we watch EPL, we watch the women's Premier League, we watch a lot of like Big Ten soccer because she's a Minnesota alum. Okay. So it's on all the time. I am really closely following the NSIC, especially Moorhead, obviously, and Crookston. And some of my colleagues like Greta, Greta and Sarah specifically, I'm like so pumped to just support them and be like, go get them, So it was really fun to watch the results this weekend. And I do miss like the thrill of a new season, like the hope of like, this is going to be the season I'm going to like upset everybody or like win a game no one expects me to. And just like that kind of fun piece of like the X's and O's of soccer. I do miss that a little bit. Yeah.
It's always like the possibility of building something, right?
Yes,
it's always,
yes.
So you can believe. I mean, I was going to ask you this. I mean, I'll ask you about Moorhead more specifically, but for you, we've talked before about the tiers. So you, as a coach, you have to have realistic expectations. You also have to kind of dream, because there is a certain thing, with sports psychology and in life. If you don't really just say it and believe it, it can be a detriment to you in terms of having the possibility of like believing it. But you also know exactly where your team finished the last few years. You know how many new players you have. How did you personally balance that of like, because you have to, maybe you wouldn't say lie, but you have to, maybe it is a white lie, to your players a bit, to give them a certain amount of belief until you get there. Or I don't know. How do you process that?
I think the one piece maybe people don't consider that much at our level is the funding of programs. And from the top of the NSIC to the bottom of the NSIC, funding of scholarships and funding of budgets is so varied. And so, of course, I would like to say that any good coach can overcome those hurdles. But the longer I was in it, the more I just don't know that I believe that anymore.
Moneyball, Christie. Why did you moneyball it? Did anyone ask you that, if you're going to moneyball this situation?
No, but it's just like people are like, oh, well, why can't you win? And it's like, well, there's some outside factors that you're not aware of, but also like, I'm not going to, break that down for you.
Yankees and the Twins a little bit.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you sort of saying it on a show, because when we talk to NSIC coaches, like, just on background and we're just chatting with them, or if I'm at a game and I'm chatting, and we're not recording, people talk about that all the time. That in a conference like the NSIC, it's especially, I think, pretty aggressively tiered in terms of funding. I think people would be kind of shocked, maybe, like the gap between having, 9.9 scholarships or whatever, and then someone having like 3 or 4, like the gap, like that level of a gap. And then, like you said, put that gap on top of coaching, salary pool, equipment, assistants, the whole staff. I think like, didn't Greta tell the story of like Jade being the first full-time assistant or something at St. Cloud or something like that?
Recently.
Yeah. Yep.
So it's just that gap is so real, like you said, it's a very real thing in the NSIC, and it exists in other conferences too. But I think in other conferences, the gap is between conferences rather than within.
Yeah. Well, usually, I think at least in the MAC when I was at Northern Illinois, everybody had to have the same scholarships.
Right.
And so then your operating budget is going to be different. So that's where there's obviously like discrepancies between who can maybe like pay for different things.
Right.
But at least if your starting spot for scholarships is the same.
Yeah.
I mean, you're all level for that extent.
Right.
So.
Right.
How much can a team, so like your resources generally aren't going to change a lot year to year. I wonder, like for you personally, because it kind of is your challenge as a coach. It's also the challenge of like players, if they build it through culture or whatever, how much can you improve internally year over year? Because certain teams, like we talk to coaches where they're so excited about recruits, and some teams don't have a lot, or the recruits aren't going to be ready yet. I'm just wondering, how much do you feel like, at a level like this where players are focused on academics too, they're doing a lot of other things, they're not trying to all become professionals. How much can like just your internal team, can you improve a team year over year? And what does it take? I guess what's the X factor in it?
It's such an internal like motivation piece for each player. I think every single spring, really at every college level, is so much about development. So if you have a player who's maybe a freshman and did really well their first fall and they're kind of hungry, they can really blossom in the spring. If they hit the weight room, they do individual sessions, they watch more film, they understand the game. So there can be a massive amount of growth in the spring. So obviously that's kind of up to each coach on how they're going to approach that particular situation. I remember I had a player at NDSU who she was going into her senior year and she just decided, like, I do not want to have the last 3 years that I had. I want to be a starter. I want to play. And she did like P90X. I don't know. That was a thing a long time ago.
Oh, yeah.
But she came back and I have never seen a personal transformation so big. And she did. She had like the best year of her life.
Yep.
So I don't know what that internal motivation is for everybody, but I definitely think it can happen. And then there's some luck in the recruiting process that sometimes you just get lucky.
Yeah.
Picking up a kid that you don't know is going to be that good. And then they're like Sarah, who was on the team last year from Denmark. I had no idea she was going to be as impactful as she was. I was just like, well, this is a good gamble. Let's see what happens. And then she was just lights out. So yeah, I just got really lucky with her.
Well, you mentioned the physical thing is so real. Like, so I've spent a lot of time covering the Gophers, who you mentioned, your partner played for and then ended up at NDSU. It really, really jumps out when you see that freshman to sophomore jump from some of these players because of that sort of like year-ish in that strength and performance program. Like on the Gophers, if folks have followed that, like Kendall Stadden from last year to this year, or like Paige Kala, who like was an every game starter last year already, but then physically looks so much sharper this year on top of that ability. At the D2 level, in terms of like the commitment to be in those strength and conditioning programs, or even just like how much a coach invests in that or values that or not, do you see that as a big difference in a conference like the NSIC in terms of how much they're focusing on that side of it? Like basically, if folks aren't, I don't know if we need to be this simple, but all of the on-field training and practices is really just one part of sort of the physical commitment that these players are making. All of the weight room performance conditioning stuff is on top of the soccer field stuff. And people probably know that, but I don't know if we ever say it as directly as that. How much do you think that is different across those different NSIC programs in terms of the off soccer field physical training commitment that programs and players put in?
I mean, it probably goes back to staffing. So like the weight room at MSUM is, it's beautiful. It was newly renovated a couple years ago. There's weight room staff in there all the time. There's a former soccer player who's in there. So there's a lot of access for student athletes at Moorhead. I don't know what access is like for every other institution. But then it probably depends on, how coaches structure their spring season. We're so limited on the amount of hours we can have at each different chunk of the spring semester. Yeah. And so it probably really comes down to, is that coach telling you like, hey, you need to be getting stronger, and are you doing stuff outside of what's just required?
Right. Right. So in other words, there may be times where all of that strength and conditioning and performance work sort of almost technically has to be player driven in the sense that like it won't be required hours. So in a sense, it's in that gray area of like, hey, this is what so maybe it's something like, hey, this is what your role was the last couple of years. If you want to have a role outside of that, it's very possible, but you might have to do X, Y, and Z outside of, but then it's all like player by player, like you're saying. Yeah,
but it's so hard because you can tell a player all you want, like you need to get better at this, but one, do they believe you? And two, are they really going to then invest in themselves to try to execute that? So
totally.
I think it was like my junior year, my coach told me I wasn't very technical, which I've never been much of a technical player. I'm more of like an athlete who runs hard and just like doesn't give up. But I spent 3 days a week for like 20 minutes that whole summer just doing passing back and forth like against a log in the barn, honestly. And I just got so much better.
God damn, that's Minnesota.
I got so much better at like my first touch, the quality of my passing, just because I put in like reps. But I would say there are very few players that are willing to put that type of dedication in, or sometimes like take the feedback of like, you know, I think that's a hard thing sometimes for players is to like apply the feedback you're giving them.
Totally.
When you have to have the right mix of, like you said, you have to be lucky in talent, lucky in chemistry too, because like you have to have. Well, I think of that where for the teams that are trying to make it to like the 8th spot, just make it to the tournament. It's not so much, you know, like the talent's probably really close among a lot of those teams. So it's more like, I guess, you know, I was going to ask you, I don't know if there's a better way to phrase it, but like, is it more important for the lower table teams to have like players of character than the teams up top? Because of course all teams need good chemistry, all teams need leadership, but like when you aren't gonna punch talent above, you know, is there something to the X factor of you have to find some chemistry or cohesion because you're not better than, you know, some other teams?
Yeah, I think it's like the leadership component is critical. When I got to Moorhead, I had a player named Marin Supir who was like a phenomenal leader, and she really had the ability to influence most of the team in a really positive way. And she was also my hardest working player. But that leadership was invaluable when you're going up against someone who, like, on paper, you're probably the same as, but then you have this person who's like, she's going to take it to the next level every time. I think that really, helps some of those teams climb a little higher.
Right. Talk to us I mean, obviously this Moorhead team has a lot of your, maybe all of your fingerprints on it.
No, the new coach brought in a lot of players.
Okay. So I was going to ask. So, I mean, there are just 3 seniors, right? A lot of newcomers, 15 maybe, I think I counted. A lot of first years. So, I mean, similar to other years, right? You were a team that had some good results, had some close losses, hoping to climb up to be in that contention spot. What would you have been telling Moorhead, your Moorhead State team this fall about goals for the year? Would it be, would the goals be, improving on last year, obviously? Would you be talking about the tournament? How would you create goals for this year's MSU squad?
I mean, I think it's always was trying to make the tournament. I mean, that's like a really cool experience to get to have, a really easy kind of target landmark to get to. They lost 10 seniors last year. So in my head, when I was like planning, I knew that it might be a slightly more challenging year this year because it's really hard to replace that leadership. So I think it probably would have been, again, like still striving for top 8, but maybe like growing the team to find some more cohesion in the earlier part of the season. So maybe our results could reflect that cohesion later, but we would have probably done a lot of stuff in the spring also to try to like get that group in the spring really on a good page. So then the freshmen, you're just hoping that a few of them can kind of have an impact.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's every year. The thing about it is the NSIC is so tight, but it goes by fairly quick once it starts. When you actually look at the schedule, you're like, we're a couple games in and now we have to find a place. Find a place to get momentum. Talk to us. One other team I wanted to get your insight on. And we're trying to spread out the love, but St. Cloud State really seems to be in a moment. You said last year you weren't surprised, to see them take that step up, although it was a solid step up from being a contender to the playoffs to winning the regular season. They started the year really solid, beating UMD, a result they had to get, and then beating Bemidji State. Like you said, not surprised that they're keeping going, but does it feel like an era? Because I mean, they weren't at the top, and they weren't just beating Bemidji State and leading the conference the last few years. Does it feel like the growth into an era for the Huskies?
Yeah, I mean, I coached at St. Cloud for like a year, a long, long time ago.
Oh, nice.
And it's like, it's so close to the cities. It's kind of a cool campus. It's along the river. It has this beautiful stadium. The locker room is like lights out. I was shocked when I walked into the locker room. And Greta's just so it's like she has a plan, and she's got like all these calculations. And so I don't know, I bet she's like, you could probably ask her like, what's your plan for 2026 Huskies? And she could probably has it drawn up in her board. Like she's just very like thoughtful and a planner. And so it's not surprising. It does feel a bit like a shift into them being in like the top repetitively.
Yeah.
But I'm not surprised because I know Greta and I know Jade, and it's awesome to see a all female coaching staff just up there. I'm pumped.
I mean, we've had a few different ways we've phrased it, but one way I've phrased it is like, and I've even said it to Greta and Jade, it's like, it's just so easy to root for them. I mean, it's so like, that's one way I say it, of like, we love all of these programs and we try and highlight all these programs, and, you know, tons of teams have cool, you know, cultural pieces, like longtime head coach in Duluth that's really revered, and, you know, Winona State, you know, hiring a new, you know, head coach, and potential for that. And, you know, longtime successful programs like, you know, Jim up in Bemidji and Brian down in Mankato. Like there's all these nooks and crannies to cheer for, but it's like, man, it's easy to cheer for St. Cloud. Like it's just, they're just so fun to watch. And it's also kind of, like you said, that classic, like, not being in the top tier to getting up there gives these underdog vibes that are so easy for us to grab onto. And yeah, man, one other thing we wanted to ask you about too, Christie, is I think particularly in D2, the way that NCAA tournament field comes together feels so much more specifically regionalized than at the D1 level. And, you know, one thing I've said on shows this fall is, the reason I talk about national RPI so much in D1 is because that's such a determinant of like a rough metric of like how you get into that final field. In D2, it really is so regionalized, where like you are part of this 3-conference region and you have to make the top 8 in that region in order to get through. But a funny dynamic at play is all fall, all you see is the coaches poll. And the NCAA ranking doesn't come out basically until the tournament field is unveiled. So you all as coaches might have some vague idea about where you are in the NCAA rankings, like the RPI, if you will. But all anyone sees, all we see as people covering it, is this coaches poll. And there's a funny dynamic someone keyed us into just this week, which is not all NSIC programs pay to be part of the United Coaches membership. And so the voting polls are already political, but then the voting in D2 in particular ends up being a little wonky because only certain programs pay to be members. So only certain coaches vote in the coaches poll. So, I mean, you all weren't necessarily stressing about whether you were getting, you know, poll respect, I guess, but was that dynamic, like, did it feel even more political for that reason of like, oh God, well, this program always is going to be higher because they're coach like this coach or whatever? Like, that dynamic feels kind of unique to me.
It's just like bizarre, I guess, like that everyone doesn't have to be a part of it, or you can't include them even if their coaches aren't going to vote somehow. Like, it's like you might be excluding like the best team in the conference because the program is deciding not to be part of United Soccer Coaches.
Right.
It's kind of weird, but it's also not that many people pay that much attention always to those things.
Right.
Because they know that it's like a flawed system, if you will.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
It's just, it ends up being so funny. Oh, Mark, you're muted somehow.
I've been focusing on this in my pieces, Christie. I've been using these polls. This is amazing though to know. I mean, look, it is. I mean, polls are. I mean, also, it's not as if they're so far off from what the rankings become usually. I mean, people eventually, especially once you're playing conference games, it's like you can see how teams matched up, and it's so not that we ever notice something crazy, but it's interesting to know, and also good for me because I didn't understand the contrast. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. Well, Christie, Matt, what were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say the way it comes into play is like last year during the NSIC tournament when St. Cloud won the regular season, but they fell in conference tournament play. The reason it comes into play also is because it's so regionalized. Who is first in those rankings determines hosting and all that kind of stuff. And so for a team like St. Cloud, they sort of knew as they were hosting the NSIC tournament that sort of like if they dropped they weren't super likely to host, but there was still a chance they could host. So there's all these weird, like, because of the way the tournament is structured, it plays into all of these other dominoes. That's why it sort of becomes an internal whatever for these programs.
Sure.
It ends up mattering. But yeah, Christy, we're going to get to see you this weekend. I think I'll be able to see you at one or two games, right? Because at least this Sunday, for the people in the cities, we like to try to watch who Concordia has hosting. St. Cloud and Mankato are close enough for us, but it's easiest when the Golden Bears have a game. Moorhead plays at Concordia on Sunday at 1 p.m. So I should be able to be there at least for most of that game and see you there. Christy, are you planning to go? They're also... Yeah, are you planning to go to that one with the Dragons?
I am planning, yep. I already told a couple players I was going to go, so I can't back out now.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time, Christy. You have taken your lunch break with us. We got to give you at least a little break to get back into the groove. We'll talk to you again soon, I'm sure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you guys. Take care.
Thank you, Christy. Awesome. Matt, why don't you... I love having more coaches to get insight from. Getting more coaches on. There's a few more in the NSIC we should try at some point this year, especially in tournament time. But yeah.
Well, and I had completely forgot that she mentioned her partner was a former Gopher, and now, oh my God, this household is going to get dragged into so much bullshit with us now. We're going to be pulling them in all the time.
It's a lot of pressure because we do know some stuff about women's soccer. We don't know everything. Yeah, Matt didn't know that was her part. I mess up the towns that players are from constantly. Yeah, it's straight up civil warring people. But yeah, Matt, why don't you give credit to our longtime sponsor, Pentz Homes, for keeping you nice and warm today?
Yeah, let's shout out Pentz Homes. I am sitting in a Pentz home. Of course, longtime viewers and listeners know Nate and Lydia are fantastic partners for us. They're fantastic to work with in the buying and selling process. We've gone through multiple purchases and sales with them, and they've always been really, really helpful. Really helpful in explaining things maybe you don't appreciate, maybe you don't understand about, like the inspection process, financing process, all that stuff. And they work with people all over. They work with people in small rural towns, exurban communities, suburbs, in the urban core. So anywhere you're at, if you are looking to refinance, looking to buy or sell, check them out. Just have a conversation with them, see if the vibe is right. They are just really big supporters of what we do, and we can't appreciate them enough. So check them out, especially if you're going to move. And again, I'll throw out the offer I make once in a while. If you're a soccer coach or a player and you're looking for a house, we will produce a House Hunter style show of you going through that process if you want. So if anyone wants some spotlight, get nuts.
He's going to make you if you don't. Also, yeah, shout out to Luminate Financing. I'm a huge, you guys know how much I care about home financing. Luminate Financing is the only one I can name literally. So,
Angie answered a lot of dumb questions I had about like random loans we were going for. Angie's absolutely the best.
All right, Matt, now the time to give a little spotlight to the Tommies. St. Thomas, 4-4-1 now, going into Summit League play. I mean, would you take the record? You think that's what you'd expected? How do you feel about how they stand coming into the conference?
Yeah, I think it's about right in terms of if you were predicting things on paper. In terms of the wins and losses, I would say the disappointment for if you're a Tommy player, Tommy coach, or a fan, I would say the disappointment is more in some of the margins. The results I don't think are anything that you have to be too upset about. Entering their last non-conference game, they were in the top 200 in RPI, which would have been a nice sort of step up from where they've been finishing the last couple years. And then, after that big loss at Marquette, they're now more in like the mid 200s, which is where they've been the last few years. So I think if you go to Milwaukee and you face a Marquette team and you lose on the road, that's not really anything to be embarrassed about. Dropping at 5-0, that's a little bit outside of where you want to be. Same with that earlier match at Northern Illinois. That's sort of a really good snapshot moment where you go into halftime tied, on the road against a MAC opponent, and then you end up dropping, 4-1. That's just kind of a tough result. And granted, there was some weird bad luck in that where Abby Brantner gets a red card on an unintentional handball and they go a player down and blah, blah, blah. But either way, that sort of those two results kind of jump out as like, you don't really want to have the score line get to that kind of a point. But otherwise, I would say their results are pretty much on paper what you would expect. Marquette is a pretty quality team. They pulled a tie against Milwaukee. They kept it close against the Gophers. So I think it's more on the margins where you're a little disappointed.
Yeah, I can see that. I mean, they're still looking for that first, I think, and capable of, I might add, it looks like, that first step up where they're challenging a bit more to get into the Summit League tournament, or at least be in the places for it, right? Are they eligible this year?
No, not yet.
So that's difficult, but showing a lot more potential. I think the rotation maybe looks a little tighter in terms of like minutes, which maybe signals a little bit of, ideas coming together, who the players want to be. Starting off Summit play, it starts okay, although if you look at the first 4 games, pretty tough overall. South Dakota and Oral Roberts, games you could get results in, but not easy games. And then next weekend is South Dakota State and Denver. So I mean, maybe first look at what would you hope for the first weekend, in terms of points for them. What do you think in expectations for the Tommies?
Yeah, honestly, like we were just doing a lot of conversation about the NSIC with Christie. The Summit League is the same, and I guess every conference is the same, but it really sucks to be a lower table team trying to climb up in these conferences. Like these conference tables are brutal. Like this is a really, really tough first 4 games for the Toms. I would say it's to a point where South Dakota and Oral Roberts are sort of teams you have to get points from if you want to be anything but bottom 3. I mean, you basically have to be able to steal a tie from one or both of these types of programs, these sort of middle class Summit League programs, because otherwise you're just not going to be able to escape that bottom 3. So the ambitious goal, I would say, if you're the Toms in this opening weekend, is you kind of have to be able to pull points in both of these games. If you want to be a little bit more realistic, you maybe want to be able to pull at least just one, maybe a point out of this opening weekend. To be honest with you, if I was I would take this reset moment if I was St. Thomas. If Sheila called us and was like, hey, we need you as a consultant, come in, help us reset for the second half. I have a pitch for St. Thomas. We had Anna Tobias on a couple episodes ago talking about ring season for the Bulldogs. I want St. Thomas to do 2024 Summit League play as their villain season. I want them to go in. Okay. I want the entire mindset. Everyone focuses on development, getting better. They're all very nice people. I want this to be full on straight up. We want to ruin the other team's day. We want to steal points. We want to be a nightmare to play against. I think that is the mindset the Toms should take. We mentioned earlier they can't play in the Summit League tournament. Even if they qualified points wise, they can't play. And so I think they should go full on chaos agent of just create chaos in the Summit League table. And that is the entire mindset. Be jerks. You're not going out and hurting people, but have the mindset of, we want to mess with this other team's fall. We want them to be so pissed off that they came to St. Paul and left with a tie instead of a win. I think that's the mindset to go with, because there's a lot of good players, as you mentioned, the rotation, and we can get into some of the individual, spotlights later on. But I think as a team, that's the mindset to go with, of just, listen, we can't make the postseason. We're still in this weird, overly long purgatory where, because we were D3, we can't make the conference tournament. And so I would go full chaos, full menace. That's what I would do. Just be a spoiler, get nuts.
Sorry, I have a little bit of a cold. I'm trying to be respectful with the mute button. Too professional, one might say. But no, I that's a fun motivator, to know that you can't make it, and kind of like a fun thing to be like, it's like a bad news bears situation. Also, it is funny when the team, I get you don't want schools to abuse the jump up, and maybe in revenue sports that'd be, I guess, it's more of a threat, but you still couldn't do it with money. So it is funny. You're like, we don't want to let this D3 team come in and spook us in the tournament. You're But by the way, hey, this will be a fun, St. Thomas, this will be the narrative we get to run with if you finish in the
baby
spot. So we'll have fun with it for sure. They've been fun to watch so far. And then, they'll have that next weekend, especially tough to get anything out of South Dakota State and Denver. That'll all be kind of So that'll, after that, a little more easy. Finish out with North Dakota State, some of the lesser teams from the table of last year.
Yep.
Talk about the positives in terms of individuals. Some people really are figuring out their spot. I mean, Olivia Rowe plays all the minutes in goal, right?
Yep.
They have some of those things figured out, but there's other players as well. Who do you think stands out in terms of, the core coming into the Summit campaign?
Yeah, I think we've seen a lot of the same contributors being steady presence, like Cameron Toole, Ellie Tempero, Sophia Caballero, Mariah Wynn, all these sort of mainstays. Brantner's been, so good at left back. Individually, statistically, Lexi Huber jumps out. She actually still leads the Summit League in goals and game-winning goals, so she's been absolutely clutch. 5 goals so far this fall. Just, really, really delayed equal time bump for Lexi Huber, who was on a show 4 years ago and continues to be an all-star for them. Olivia Rowe, I think she deserves some credit back there in net for the Toms. They don't have the stoutest defensive performance, but she's facing a ton of shots. She has the 4th most saves in the league. And so I think she's been holding it down pretty well back there, considering the quality of opponent they've had so far. And then some of those young guns have really been showing some good potential. This is for those who are sort of maybe don't remember, this is the 4th year for that gigantic first D1 recruiting class. And so the Toms are going to lose a ton of talent out the door just because of the nature of having that huge first class. And so as you look at some of these young players, we really have seen some fun moments from like Bryant at outside back, Carlson in the midfield, Hoyska, McEwen, Nygaard, Knowles, all have really had moments that I've been impressed with on the field, and tons of others too, but those are just the ones that sort of jump to mind. So that's kind of fun when you think about future years and when they are eligible to get into the postseason. Those are some of the players who might be the reason that make it happen. And then just a couple of fun, like random surprises I would never have guessed if you asked me to predict this. Sophia Bargeste, who's a really quality midfielder and has played sort of all over in that front 6 for the Toms, is actually 2nd in the team in shots. Like I would never have guessed that coming in. So she's actually been into that final third a lot more than I would have guessed. I would have assumed she's maybe more that box to box 8, but she's really been getting forward, which is kind of fun for her. And then Tatum Treadle, who early on in her St. Thomas career was recovering from, I think it might have been like 3 ACL tears, like not just 2, but 3 or something in a row, which is absolutely nuts. She really is looking, when you watch her this fall, and I mentioned it with Sydney Cubes on a show a few times ago, she really looks physically back to what she must have been as sort of an early prospect. And so she's been really fun to watch. She's 3rd in the team in shots, which I also wouldn't have predicted just because of some of these other attackers who are mainstays and all that stuff. So fun to sort of see her be really what I think is maybe what her like physical peak would be, and she just looks really dangerous out there. So yeah, fun moments. And you mentioned the upcoming next weekend they host South Dakota State. I'll make sure that's a Sunday, and so I'll make sure we're there and getting some interviews with some tailgaters and all that. It's a little bit chaotic with the arena construction going on over there, but we'll find the tailgate. Don't worry, we never have a problem finding the tailgate.
Yeah. For locals this weekend, good timing of games for St. Thomas too. They play Thursday. They play versus South Dakota on Thursday, 4 p.m. Central. That's like we said, it's close by in St. Paul. There is a bit of that construction, but easy place to go. You can watch from the parking ramp if you want. Sunday, they play Oral Roberts at 1 p.m. Central. So those are all close and local. They don't interfere with the Minnesota United game this Saturday. And then, next Sunday, big for South Dakota State. That's a big Minnesota game. We'll do our best to spotlight all those. But yeah, the Tommies, big test. I like the villain season. Let's get into it.
Get nuts.
Matt, you are equal time on the road this weekend. He's got the itch. Although he got an early itch and had to go to Wisconsin last weekend because he's sick and he can't rest.
Yeah, I won't be able to cover the Tommy games in person because I'll be out in California. The Gophers are making their first ever LA double trip to face USC on Thursday, I believe, and then UCLA on Sunday. So I'll be there on the ground. 2 really, really big challenges for the Gophers, but also kind of the type of weekend where on paper no one would expect you to do anything. You know, some random national pundit would always pick both of the LA schools in both of these games. And so the Gophers historically actually have done pretty well in games like that, where there's sort of no expectation. You're playing an opponent that maybe thinks they're going to get the win, and so you can come in and play spoiler. They actually have done pretty well in situations like that. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're able to somehow pull off, you know, something like that in one of these games, but really, really tough ones. They just finished a home road split where they got the big win over Michigan 3-0, and then dropped a tough one at Wisconsin, where Wisconsin got, you know, in my scout about Wisconsin, I mentioned like they are going to pounce on any second chance opportunity. That's what they ended up doing. They got an early corner kick on got one attempt that was blocked, and then the follow on goes in. So a tough one there. And they also really sort of played well after that, but just weren't able to score. So drop 0-1 at Wisconsin, which is not a result you're, you know, super upset about, but really a missed opportunity considering how well they created chances. So yeah, an exciting LA trip for the Gophers. I would say the battle for that top 10 in the Big Ten is going to be so absolutely brutal. They sit right now 9th in terms of RPI if you ranked out all these teams. You know, I mentioned their ceiling being able to maybe crack into that top 6. I think that's going to be really tough. But honestly, even making the Big Ten tournament field, considering how brutal this Big Ten is, would be a pretty big accomplishment. Because when you look at that ranking of Big Ten teams, it's just an absolute murderer's row after that new expanded field.
Yeah, absolutely. Fun. We're going to stay tuned for Equal Time content on the road. Matt and Rochelle are going to get, I don't know, sushi, smoothie. I don't know what you're doing at SoCal.
Going to the bar where New Girl was filmed.
Sure. I might as well. While you're there, shout out. I mean, we're talking NSIC. Shout out to SoCal, of course. We said it last week, but yeah, San Diego Wave replacement keeper Mackenzie Rath from Minnesota State. I wanted Christie to get to do lunch before she had a 1 p.m. meeting. Otherwise, I would have asked her about what it's like to see NSIC players playing pro. I'm sure she would have said, it's great, man. We're excited. But yeah, Jenny Vetter continues to play. We'll stay tuned on that. But yeah, everyone tune in next week. Watch this weekend across social because Matt's going to be in LA, baby.
Yeah. And quick shout out to Maddie Deline and the USU 20s sealed in the bronze medal. I think the vast majority, if not all, vast majority of the U.S. goals came when Maddie came off the bench and they were dangerous late in these games. She did that again in the third place game, forced an own goal with a nice, dangerous cross back from the end line. And so she's been super lethal for them. Now she'll be back in at UNC. UNC has been on an absolute tear, in part because Claire Gagne has been just absolutely unstoppable. I think 10 clean sheets or something like a
grinding form. Yeah, stepped right in. Locked in starter at keeper. Maybe we'll have a chance to talk to Claire later this fall. We hope.
Fingers crossed. And then shout out to Katie Duong. Also in the Super League, we mentioned Jenny Vetter. There was a certain stats posted by the league where like chances created. I couldn't confirm any of that in Y-Scout or anything, but certain stats where she was actually leading the league because she's been a constant contributor for them and taking a lot of the set pieces. She actually didn't start the game out in Spokane and came on late, but she's been playing consistently. Vetter's been, now that she's healthy, been playing consistently. So yeah, excited to see those pros.
Yeah, nice. And I hope for that as the league gets going too. It's kind of tough to like search stats and minutes to see so hopefully, you know, the broadcasts are looking pretty good. You know, attendance are getting figured out. It's a very new league. So hopefully as we have more of that stuff, it'll become easier for us to kind of like spotlight certain stuff going on too. And who knows, maybe we'll see some more Minnesotans sign. But yeah, thank you everybody for tuning in. We'll be back next week. We'll do some more broader spotlight on D1 trends in Minnesota. And we'll see what happens, Summit League, NSIC, everything else this weekend. Later.